Hello, and thanks so much for checking out the Coin Stories podcast video page. I'm Natalie Brunell, and I'm talking to the leading voices in Bitcoin about their backstories, career paths, and their philosophy on BTC. This podcast does not provide financial advice. I'm so excited to share my guest this week is Bill Pulte. Bill amassed a huge following as the ultimate Twitter philanthropist, and he's given away hundreds of thousands of dollars to people in need. He is always tweeting out, hey, I'm giving away $100 here. Hey, I'm giving away $1,000 here. And more recently, he's actually been giving out Bitcoin because he wants to help increase adoption and awareness. You might also know Bill as the grandson of William Pulte, who founded one of the largest home building companies in the country. But Bill actually worked to create his own fortune through investing and private equity. He is super passionate about Bitcoin, philanthropy, and human empowerment. Here's Bill. Okay, Bill, thank you so much for joining me today. Super excited to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start at the very beginning and just learn a little bit about your upbringing. I read that you were born in Michigan.
I was actually, believe it or not, born in Florida, but my whole family is originally from Michigan.
Well, so tell me a little bit about your life. A lot of people are familiar with who your grandfather is. And, I'm almost curious too. It's probably annoying, right, when people know you from a family member as opposed to your own accomplishments first, right?
Yeah, it was kind of funny growing up. Everybody thought, you're Bill's grandson or something like that, because my grandfather's name was Bill as well. And as you said, he was very well known. But it was funny, towards the end of his life, people would ask him, are you Bill Pulte's grandfather? And so it's kind of funny how things had changed, because I grew up and then all of a sudden he started to get known. Obviously what we've done on Twitter philanthropy has really differentiated us in terms of built a name for us and really gotten something exciting out, which we'll talk about. But long story short, my dad was also a home builder. My dad's name was Mark, and my dad built large luxury homes in Florida, believe it or not, for a living. So we actually grew up in Florida early on, and then over the years, went to college and loved Florida. And so I spent a lot of time in Florida now, but the family's originally from Michigan.
So when you were young, tell me what you were like when you were a kid. I'm assuming that at a young age, you sort of knew that your grandfather was very successful and that you had it maybe a little bit better than the average kid in the US.
Yes. I did. I'll tell you this. One day, my grandfather, I think, was either on the cover of Forbes or was inside of Forbes or something like that. And it was Easter. And I went up to him and I asked him about it. And he pulled me in the laundry room and he said, don't you ever bring that up again. And he said, don't you ever think that you're rich? Don't you ever think, these things? And I would say him and my father did a really good job of making me work on job sites, making me work on construction sites growing up. I have very vivid memories of cleaning out behind porta potties and all kinds of stuff that they made sure that I did. So, I definitely knew that I came from a family of means. But as a kid, I would say that I was really alongside both my grandfather and my dad and tried to learn as much as I could about business. And, fortunately, I've been able to make money independent of my family. I say I haven't inherited money because, frankly, my dad hasn't passed away, and hopefully he doesn't for a long time, because I wasn't one of my grandfather's kids. So I've had to make money independently and, been happy to do that. And, that's kind of what gave birth to the whole Twitter philanthropy.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about your own career. When you were young, did you want to go into sort of home building or the family business, or did you feel like you wanted to do something else when you grew up?
Not really. I didn't, I have a good business skill set, I would say, but my grandfather and father, it's a good question. And anybody who has a home or has built a home can identify with this. But they had a real knack for design, and they could really see things in the third dimension in terms of in a home, and they would know how to do things. They knew what colors, certain things needed to be, and they had that kind of builder's eye, so to speak. I never really inherited per se as good as they did in that regard. So it wasn't something that I really wanted to do, but I knew that the art of business was something that I wanted to get into. And so I learned as much as I could. I sucked as much as I could out of those two guys growing up.
Well, that's awesome to hear. Actually, just out of curiosity, I love those stories of just, I don't know, grandfather or grandmother passing things on to the next generation, which which passes it on to the next generation. So can you share a little bit just about how your grandfather was able to build this? Because when I was reading about you online and reading about your grandfather, it was like he built something with his college roommates or something and sold the first property for $10,000 and then like slowly but surely built this massive, massive company.
Yeah, he started the business back in 1950 at age 18, believe it or not. He was a carpenter, and he built his first house. And he wasn't college educated. One of those classic Depression era stories. But he taught me a number of things. I had the pleasure of working somewhat with him in business. I was involved with his business there for a number of years before he passed away. So he taught me a number of things, but I would say the number one thing he taught me was that, there was no such word as can't. That was what he constantly said. And, even in terms of my own career, but also with Twitter philanthropy, people often ask me, well, why do you give away money online? It's kind of a crazy idea. In fact, many people thought that I was, hacked or something when I first started giving away money, but it stems very much from that belief of there's no such word as can't. And so, when people ask me, well, why do you give it away? I say, well, why not? Why not give away money? And so, that would be, I'd probably say, the best lesson for him. But there's a ton of lessons that I learned over the last 30 years, so to speak.
Yeah, I bet. Well, let's talk a little bit about your career and how you did sort of amass your own fortune. You worked really hard. Where'd you go to college and sort of what were your first jobs?
So I went to Northwestern University, which I know you went to Northwestern as well. And out of Northwestern, I went and worked for an investment firm. And the investment firm focused on transportation assets, buying and selling operating companies within transportation. And so at that firm, I had the idea, because of my experience in housing products, in housing services, in home building growing up, that I would start Pulte Capital. So starting in 2011, so about 10 years ago, I started Pulte Capital. And since then, we've had a number of businesses that we've bought and successfully sold. We went on to sell them to various private equity funds, and those companies are doing very well today. So, that's always good when that happens, when you sell the things and then they go on and into perpetuity. So that's really what we've been up to.
Okay, so I know you went to Medill, woohoo, but that's a journalism school. So what prompted that? Did you want to be a news anchor?
In high school, I would announce all the sports games and stuff like that. Everybody always said, "Oh, you have a great voice," blah blah blah. And I would do TV every morning in high school. So I decided to go to journalism school, thinking that, hey, I might be interested in sports broadcasting. Medill, obviously, the number one journalism school. And then I actually got my helicopter license, believe it or not. So I'm a helicopter pilot. It's a long story, but I basically saved up enough money, got my helicopter license, and then I had a helicopter business. I was selling aerial photos. This was before drones. And I was selling aerial photos in Evanston and in Chicago, Illinois, because that's where Northwestern is. And once I started that business, coupled with my family's background, I was like, okay, I'm focusing on business. So that was my limited experience in journalism.
Wait, so share the helicopter story. I mean, it's got to be a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I had a small business in college that was almost like a classifieds website, but for university campuses. And it actually was pretty damn successful, which was kind of funny because I had a big company that wanted to buy me, and they ended up wanting to go public. They ended up going public one day. But I ended up taking just a little bit of cash to sell that company, to sell that classifieds business. And with that cash, I had this idea after watching Jack Bauer on 24. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I thought about, maybe do I go into the military? Do I learn how to do it that way? I actually looked into that, but that's pretty hard to get your helicopter license doing that. So I just went to the local airport, got the helicopter license, and then had the idea to start an aerial photography business. And that business made a lot of money. And so I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So I'd grown up around business and stuff, but it's one thing to grow up around it, and then it's another one to actually have to run a business. So,
I want to ask you something, and it's also sort of a comment and a compliment. I think that sometimes when kids come from very wealthy backgrounds, or their parents or grandparents were very, very successful, they can almost go down two paths. They could sort of live off of that money and sort of be lazy, or maybe, I don't know, they could spend it or go down a really
go to a beach somewhere and have a lot of alcohol.
Yeah, for sure. But also they could go down the path of just being really inspired and have that motivation and that fire and want to do something great. It's almost like you're on one side, people feel like they're living in the shadow of their father or their grandfather, and I have friends that have felt that way. On the other, it's like this confidence, like I can do it, they did it, I'm gonna prove myself as well, and I want to make my own money. Where do you fall, or what are your thoughts on that?
I just look at it like, what else am I going to do? And so it's like, I don't know. It's just something in me wants to go do all this stuff. Something in me wanted to post that thing on Twitter about, giving away money. I mean, I had no interest in, being more public, and then boom, the thing happened. So I honestly, I don't know where it comes from, but I just have tried to, maybe it's because, growing up, my dad made sure that I knew, hey, you're not getting any money, and, you better work your ass off on these job sites or else you're going to be screwed. He kind of put the fear of God in me. And I don't know, maybe that helped, but either way, I'm very grateful.
Wait, so he told you you're not getting any money?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Why?
Because I think that, he always used to say, I want to teach you the value of a dollar. And he did. I mean, he really did. I mean, to his credit, I mean, if I owed him $2 growing up, he made me pay him back, and at the time you think, oh, he's a jerk, why is he making me do this? But then you realize he was teaching me a lesson. So I don't know whether I get it from there but as I said, what else am I going to do? I mean, I don't think this idea of, going to a beach somewhere, it's nice, but I'd go crazy if I had to go work on a beach for the rest of my life.
This is going to be kind of a weird question, but I'm just going to ask it. I mean, I read online that this like net worth for you that's just completely out of this world. I can't even imagine. I mean, my whole life, I come from an immigrant background. It's been sort of like struggling to get by at times, seeing my parents struggle, and always being so scared for the future that somehow your finances are going to crumble. What does it feel like to be worth that much?
Well, I don't know how much it has me listed for, but my grandfather's name was also Bill. So, sometimes it gets the two of us mixed up, but I don't know what number was it that you saw?
Oh, like 100 million. And then the company, I think, was like
Okay.
10 billion.
I thought you meant like 1.6 billion or something like that.
Well, even 100 million to me, I'm like, oh,
yeah,
that's a lot of Bitcoins.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've been able to do very well for myself personally. And I'm very grateful, but that's also why I've given away over $1 million on Twitter at a young age, is because, not because I have some type of guilt or some type of thing, although who doesn't, at times, but it's really because, and we could talk about it, but it's kind of like, okay, well, what else are you going to do with all this money? And so, I found immense joy in doing Twitter philanthropy, frankly.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you next. I mean, what really sparked that for you? Obviously, I know you said you were inspired by your family, but what made you start to think that you wanted to share and give away some of your hard-earned money and, share it with people that are really struggling? I know you give to a lot of people who have medical expenses, and you have all these giveaways on Twitter. You're the inventor of Twitter philanthropy. So where did this all begin?
Well, I basically, had made a lot of resources, a lot of money, and I bought nice things and did those things, and I grew up around many of those things. But what you quickly realize is that, or at least I did, was that there's a lot of joy in giving, and it's actually fairly selfish to give, and I think that that's fine. In fact, I tell people, you got to take care of yourself before you take care of others, and so. Honestly, the reason I give is not just because it's the right thing, but because it also is very selfish in the sense that, it can bring joy that, certain things in life don't bring. And so to answer your question about how did it start, it really started from that basic concept that, I had been surrounded by wealth growing up and, was fortunate enough to make my own money. And so, you start looking at the bank account and you're doing, those type of things. And you're saying, there's got to be a way that I can impact more people now with these resources. And so I had the idea. I was in Northern Michigan. I was at my cottage and I was looking out over the lake, and I don't think I had had a beer or two yet, but I was thinking to myself, what if I fired off a tweet that said something like, I'll give $10,000 to the best, to the charity that is ranked the highest, or something like this by you guys, let you guys vote on it. And sure as hell, I mean, Natalie, this thing went viral as hell. Okay. And, I never had a viral tweet before. I think I maybe had, 10 or 20,000 Twitter followers or something like that. Now we've got like 2 million, something like that. But, this thing went viral. And I said, wow, I said, I'm really onto something. And now it's kind of normal that people transact Bitcoin and US dollar over Twitter and over these social media platforms. But if you may recall, back in 2019, I mean, that was kind of totally unheard of. So at first people thought it was a scam. They thought I was a fraud, all this kind of crap. And they quickly found out, because I published how much money I gave away and I line itemed it out almost in an audit type fashion, to kind of dispel that kind of stuff.
Well, so how much have you given out? And tell me some of the stories that maybe stand out to you where you were like, oh, I really want to help this person.
So I've given out over $1 million between all of the social media platforms, my interactions with different people who are, either terminally ill from cancer, who have diabetes. Sometimes people just need a one-time hand up. In terms of the Twitter platform alone, I believe the number is, and you could find this on my profile somewhere. In fact, I've been meaning to tweet it out recently because it's updated, but on Twitter alone, I've given out over $800,000 that we can account for. Now, I think that those numbers are actually higher, but I have to be very careful about saying that I did something and backing it up. And so that's all that's accounted for. I do help people one-off and don't put it in the spreadsheet, don't tweet about it sometimes. But for the most part, I try to tweet about it because, Natalie, one of the things that's amazing about Twitter is that now it's being used more than ever to solve poverty, to solve problems with people. And so if I can inspire other people to give, that's really what I'm after. I'm not so much after just, me giving away my money. Like a couple of weeks ago, we raised money for that one of the soldiers who died in Afghanistan. And we with a couple of tweets, we helped raise $20,000 or something for the family. So that's my goal, is to inspire other people to give.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you really, really do. Just out of curiosity, your family's in the home building industry. And so I want to talk a little bit about how I think the American dream has really changed, right? I think that idea of owning a home, it used to be more within reach, especially in these big cities now. It's like most people, especially like millennials, they can't fathom owning a home. And it's almost like we're losing that sense of the middle class. And there are so many problems that are bubbling up. And with social media, obviously we can put a spotlight on them. By doing these sort of Twitter giveaways and reaching out to communities, have you felt like, wow, the problems are even bigger than I imagined, or there are so many people that need help? Like, do you feel like the scope of the issues and the need for people to receive help is bigger than you thought?
Yes. I mean, even if you look at it, like say we got 2 million followers now on Twitter, which I call teammates because we're all together. We're like a pack of bees. And when there's somebody who's dying of cancer, for example, we all jump in and help them out. But even if you take my 2 million Twitter followers, for example, or 2 million teammates out of 300 million people in the United States or whatever, right? We're just really cracking the surface in terms of the need. So now, granted, some of my tweets get, 10, 20, 30 million impressions. So, we're accessing a lot of people in the United States, but we're only scratching the surface. And to answer your question, yes, the need is tremendously overwhelming. And I would say not just in the United States, but the need is also overwhelming globally. I mean, because now Twitter is becoming more and more of a global platform, with Elon Musk launching the satellites and mobile phones being more accessible. I just think that the mobile adoption is going to continue. And so to your point, across the world, I believe that there's this tremendous need, and this is one of the things I think Bitcoin can be so helpful with. There's this tremendous need, but without the technology, you can't even really see it shooting up. And so I think we're really at a really interesting time where basically you have this immense mobile infrastructure across the globe, and you're going to slowly but surely see it. And you're going to say, and other people, including myself, will say, oh my God, look at this need, look at this need. And the need is, in my opinion, has always been there. It's just now with technology, you're going to be able to see it more than ever. And I think that Bitcoin is frankly probably the most transformational asset in terms of accelerating that.
Well, I agree with you. And let's talk about Bitcoin. How did you first hear about it and learn about it? And when was it?
It's a good question. I was thinking that to myself. I heard about it sometime in, I believe, 2015, 2016. I bought my first Bitcoin since then. And then I bought it. I held on to some of it. And as I got to know more and more about it, it just made a lot of sense. And I've been saying, in fact, I think when it was like at 9,000, I was tweeting. It's not financial advice, but I was tweeting like, this thing looks like it's going to be a coiled spring about to pop. I mean, you could literally go back and look at it, and boom, the damn thing went up. And that just comes from me seeing how much people are transacting it from a almost, I wouldn't say humanitarian, but on a needs-based approach. People who are not of means, who are trying to transact with each other very quickly. And Bitcoin, I was just seeing the transactions that were going on. I was like, this thing is viral. This thing is going to go up.
How did you really go down the rabbit hole? Can you share any books that you read, or how did you learn about it that convinced you?
I would say probably the most influential thing in terms of my conviction around Bitcoin really came from what Square had done. Square, the company, had done. Because this was before Michael Saylor and stuff, and Jack Dorsey and Square, they've really been on this case for a long time. And, I remember saying to some people at Square, what do you think about Bitcoin? And they say, it's going to be really valuable. This is going back 3 or 4 years or something like that. So I would say that was probably the most influential with Square, which is pretty crazy to think about it, because I think back then it was like a $20 billion company. And today Square's like a $110 billion company.
Yeah. So are you a hodler? Do you dollar cost average? Do you continually buy, or where are you at with your investment?
That's a good question. I am definitely a hodler. However, I have taken advantage of different swings to make money. And I've done that with pretty good effect. I mean, frankly, I'm still way, way up, obviously, but it's just got amazing volatility. And I love it. I think the volatility is beautiful. I think that unlike the stock market, it's a lot of people think Bitcoin's rigged. I don't really think Bitcoin's all that rigged. I actually think Bitcoin is representative of the market, unlike some of the rigged stock market with the Fed screwing around with it all the time. So I do think you can trade it a little bit. So I'm definitely long-term Bitcoin. I have a certain amount of Bitcoin. I perceive it to be a lot of Bitcoin that is parked away and I don't touch.
Well, that's interesting. I asked this of my last guest as well, but for the average American family, maybe people that follow you on Twitter who may or may not have a lot of savings, maybe they live paycheck to paycheck, how much do you think that they should allocate to something like Bitcoin?
As much as they humanly can within reason. I mean, I don't want them to tell them to miss meals and stuff like that, but, the only concern I have about Bitcoin is just some crazy tail event, and I can't come up with what it would be, but
yeah, like a black
that
swan.
would be concern. I don't know. I mean, I don't really buy all this fear porn. I call it fear porn, with the government shutting it down and that kind of stuff. But I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But sometimes I like to think that I don't know what I don't know, and
yeah.
Well, I think it's about as sure as bet of anything. But that's just my own opinion.
Well, as someone who's always had a lot of capital and a lot of savings to invest, were you before this always kind of a stock market guy and a real estate guy? And now are you moving into more cryptocurrencies as well?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I was a stock guy, housing guy, publicly traded company guy, but I'm slowly but surely morphing into, more and more crypto, I would say. But I'm definitely most bullish on Bitcoin because I think that its decentralization, its beauty is in its decentralization, in my opinion. And I don't think anybody can shut it off. I don't think anybody can stop it.
Yeah. Well, so share a little bit about, your thoughts on where we're at in our country with regards to all this money printing. We're coming out of a pandemic. People are still out of work. I'm almost curious if the numbers that we're hearing are actually accurate, because we're being told that the inflation is transitory, right? And we're being told people are back to work, but it just feels like we're so leveraged. We have so much debt. We've printed all this money. Everything is costing more. Our dollar is worth less. And you have something like a Bitcoin that's coming up that is a potential life raft and a representation of sound money again, which we really haven't had since the gold standard. Do you think about some of these big picture things of how we can solve some of the massive amounts of wealth inequality we have in this country?
Yeah, well, Bitcoin's a huge answer to that. Frankly, I don't understand why the federal government hasn't bought Bitcoin, and I say that only from a humanitarian needs standpoint, because just the way that the math works, and you and your listeners know more about this than I'll ever know. But the way that the math works is, just if you look at the compounding of the inflation, which I do not believe is transitory, I believe it's sticky. But even if you just even look at it on base inflation, 2% inflation or something like that. Okay, let's say it's even 1% inflation, right? At some point, right, even if you just had that, Bitcoin would be tremendously valuable. So I'd really prefer it if the federal government were to buy Bitcoin and to really use it to help lift some of these cities, these inner cities in particular. I've done a lot of charitable work in inner cities, cleaning up some of these dilapidated, burnt down buildings. I have a whole other nonprofit, frankly, that I run that's focused on cleaning up the inner cities. But the reason I say that is because so many of these third world countries, in my opinion, are going to be using Bitcoin to lift people out of poverty. And I just don't see why the United States should be any different than any other country.
What do you think it will take to get mass adoption? I know that people are kind of worried about some of the narratives that have been put out there with regards to climate, the amount of electricity that's used, that it's used by, nefarious actors on the dark web. What do you think it'll take for people to really get the technology?
I think they are getting it, but I think it's good that they haven't gotten it yet, because, that means they have to buy it, right? So.
So do you have like a price prediction? I mean, I know had a crazy year. Some people were expecting it to already have topped 100,000, but do you have a 2021, maybe end of the year price prediction?
I mean, I think it's going considerably higher. And, this is not advice, because who knows, people could say, oh, but I think that it's going to be, I think you could see $1 million a coin in no time. And I'm not saying anytime soon, but I think if we're looking back at this many, many years from now, Bitcoin is going to be tremendously valuable. Whether it becomes worth $1 million, I don't know, but I bet it has a higher likelihood of doing that than not.
I agree with you. Well, as a businessman, why do you think some of the big institutions haven't come in, like the Facebooks and the Googles? Do you think that's around the corner at some point?
Well, I think what's even more interesting than that, it's a great question, but I think what's even more interesting is I'm hearing rumors, credible rumors from people, from billionaires, frankly, of other billionaires buying Bitcoin. And I hear some of the alleged holdings that some of these billionaires have, and it's kind of hard to believe, but I believe it. And so I guess what I would say to you is, like, okay, maybe it's not this cycle, maybe it's next cycle, or maybe it never happens. But why are really wealthy people stacking Bitcoin?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you know the answer to that? I haven't heard I think I know the answer, but
Yeah, you need to, right? Your dollar's becoming worth less and less. And I think the stock market is so frothy and we're reaching all-time highs. It's so manipulated. It's got to come down at some point. And I think people need a safe haven. And Bitcoin, it's so fascinating that people are worried about all these, that, oh, it's going to get hacked. In the 12 years that it has existed, it has functioned pretty much perfectly. And people don't understand that. That's incredible.
Yeah, I agree. I can't think of anything that would take it down, but.
Are you like a Michael Saylor? Have you put it on your company's balance sheet, like on your private equity firm's balance sheet?
I personally hold it. In fact, I've actually talked with many of my companies, my portfolio companies, about, we have some cash balances in the companies that we operate. Obviously, they spit out cash. And so I've talked with the CEOs about buying Bitcoin. I think a couple of them are pretty close to doing it, frankly, for the same reasons we're talking about. Because we're also seeing it. We're not seeing it too much in materials. Most of our competitors are seeing it in materials. But to your point, it's just the compounded math of this thing it's not good for anybody holding cash for the long term.
I agree. Well, let's share some reflections. I mean, you have had a very interesting life and career. What are some things that you just really want your followers to know that might inspire them in whatever paths they're on, whatever industries they're in?
Well, I would say that, when I give out Bitcoin, for example, one of the things I try to get people to commit to when I literally send them Bitcoin, and it's not one of these internet scams, right? I'm actually sending my own money in Bitcoin, is I try to get people to hold on to that Bitcoin. As you can imagine, human impulses, oh, I want to sell it or something like that. So, I would say to people certainly the people who are a part of Twitter philanthropy, please hold on to the Bitcoin if I send you any of the Bitcoin, because I think it's going to be very valuable. So that would be number one, is just, I know it's tempting sometimes, especially to make your next mortgage or rent payment or food payment, but try to plan out as much as possible to hold on to it, because if the past is any indication of the future, this thing could be very valuable. So I would say that. And then I would say that, Natalie, just as I reflect on Twitter philanthropy and people who are interested in Bitcoin, they should be aware of how powerful Bitcoin is going to be for solving some of the fundamental problems that humanity has. If and when Bitcoin is successful, it will, I hate to say this, but it's true. Bitcoin in many ways will buy happiness. And what I mean by that is Bitcoin buys happiness because it takes people out of third world poverty, where they're worried about a corrupt government that's printing their money, and devaluing their currency, and gives them economic power, frankly, not so much over the government, but it is over that corrupt government, so to speak, in these third world things. So I know it's, kind of an out there thought that Bitcoin buys happiness, but I think it really does. And what I mean by happiness is economic freedom for those who are most impoverished. And I don't think that we fully understood in the Bitcoin community that impact. I think it has the potential to do more impact than any nonprofit, I think, could ever do on a global basis.
I agree with you, and I think we need to get that narrative out there more, of the human empowerment, which everyone, no matter what your politics are, can agree on. Everyone wants people to be able to survive and thrive, especially good people who just want to work hard and keep the value of their money, right? That's one of the most compelling things about Bitcoin to me. Have you ever thought about running for office?
No.
Why not?
I don't need that. It's not, I don't think that you can have as much influence as you can have with what we're doing here. And these people, they fight all day long. They yell at it. It's like sports teams, and I just look at how many people were able to help with Twitter philanthropy. I don't know anything that I could be doing more than focused on that right now. And frankly, I think Bitcoin is going to do a tremendous amount of that work. But in the meantime, we're raising money for a lot of people and stuff like that. And that's what gets me excited, not anything like that.
Do you worry that Bitcoin will be politicized and maybe one party's going to dominate support as it gets adopted, and then the other party is just going to go against it, almost because today that's what happens? One party's for something, the other one's automatically against it, and we just have all of this fighting?
It's a great question. I don't think so. But for maybe a little bit more of a dark reason than people would think. I think that the problem is that Democrats and Republicans, particularly those who are very rich and very large amounts of power, and this is sad to say, but it's true, own it. And so I think that as long as some of those influential people own Bitcoin, I think that, you even saw, I think, just a taste of it recently with the lobbying effort that went on. I mean, I'm sure there were some pretty big hitters behind the scene who are really driving that lobbying effort. So I think it's going to be very hard. I think it's very hard to put this cat back in the bag.
Well, you were talking about billionaires before. Did you hear the Ray Dalio interview? I think it was on CNBC.
I did.
Yeah, the other day, where he said government can kill it. Government can kill Bitcoin. They know how to. I mean, what did you think about him saying that? He owns Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, he owns it, but he's been on the wrong side of Bitcoin for a while, and I have tremendous respect for Ray. But I think that he's maybe very familiar with China, and maybe is hearing some rumblings from China about how China cracked down on Bitcoin. But I mean, let me ask you, how is that going to work if they try to ban Bitcoin in the United States. First of all, they'll have a revolt with all the voters, right? I mean, these cyber hornets are unbelievable. Paul Tudor Jones even just got a barely a hint of that. He was spooked, So
Well, I agree with you, and I think at some point you're basically asking the same question as how do you kill the internet? I mean, this thing is all over the world, and you have your key and your passcode in your head. I mean, how do you actually enforce something like that? And I think that hopefully governments will see that taking advantage of it could actually help their societies, their constituents prosper. But I guess the jury's still out on that. You must have been happy when El Salvador legalized it as tender, right?
it's going to be global right now with us going to space and these satellites. I mean, these satellites that SpaceX is doing. I mean, that's a big deal for Bitcoin, in my opinion. But again, I'm really focused with Bitcoin on the poverty and third world country angle. That's, what are they going to do? How are they going to stop satellites from being able to allow people to transact mobily in Uganda and Nigeria and other places?
What does it make you feel when you see these people on Twitter that are just so in need financially?
It's terrible. It's the worst feeling. Everybody who comes to work on my team, whether volunteer or full-time, says, I have no idea how you do this because the need is so overwhelming. The amount of direct messages I get is so overwhelming. So I have to set healthy boundaries with it. And we set up this nonprofit called Team Giving. I don't know if you've seen that, teamgiving.com. And that's been really successful to help people all throughout the day, every day. Because there was a period of time, Natalie, where I was helping people, whether it's sending them Bitcoin or sending them money. I was helping people all throughout the day, every day. And it's enormously taxing on somebody. I mean, I call it like being a social worker on steroids. It's like being a social worker and having like all of these electronic nodes like firing in your head all the time. Like, oh my God, this person's dying of cancer. This person has diabetes. Because right there, when I tweet, it's 10, 20, 30,000 people coming at me, and in some cases, these people are really, really hurting. I'd say a lot of people are hurting, but some of these people like are literally on death's doorstep. And, I have to set healthy boundaries with it. So yeah, that's it. But that's a high class problem to have, in my opinion. So
when you give away Bitcoin on Twitter, do you get a lot of questions from people that are just like, what is this? How do I buy it? Where do I get it? I don't understand it. I mean, you must get flooded with questions like that.
It's a great question because sometimes I have 30,000 people that reply to my tweet within 5 minutes. Okay. 30,000 people. That's a lot of people. And so when you have 30,000 people, I used to hear a lot from these, let's call it 30,000 people in the first 5 minutes. What the hell is Bitcoin? Or I don't even know what that is. Isn't that a scam? Blah, blah, blah. I very rarely hear kind of that question anymore. I would say that it's really transitioned to, hey, can I have some? Can I have some? And, I also think that that's incredibly bullish.
I think so too. Any final words and takeaways? What do you want to share with your followers and all maybe the newbies out there that don't have Bitcoin yet, or the hodlers that are so faithful, the cyber hornets?
No, how do you think that we could get Bitcoin to lift more people out of poverty? Let me ask you that.
I just think we need to spread the message and help people understand, because I think Bitcoin seems intimidating. And like I mentioned before, the mainstream media has put some narratives out there that maybe give people a bad taste in their mouth. But the more that I think people see this as a tool for empowerment and their ability to take their money, put it in the bank or put it on one of these accounts or put it on a cold storage wallet and not have to think about it, to know that it's not going to erode in value, I think is just that message that we need to get out there. And so people like you on Twitter with your massive following, you're probably going to be among the most helpful.
Yeah, well, we're trying, but as I said, Twitter only gets to so many people, but I think it's a virus and it's going to spread all across the globe. Already has.